Hey guys, welcome back. I know it's been a little while since the last one. I've been extremely busy with other life matters to attend to, which is why I've not been able to record a reading video in so long. I appreciate all the views I've gotten so far on my other content, and I hope you guys are ready to come back with me into our book, The History of the United States by Howard Zinn. I highly recommend this book, or at least, check it out before you purchase it. It's definitely worth the read now with even current events going on. People don't know a lot of the stuff that's actually being put in this book. I'm still learning a lot as I go. But other than that, let's get back into chapter 11. So, meanwhile, the government of the United States was behaving almost exactly as Karl Marx described a capitalist state, pretending neutrality to maintain order, but serving the interest of the rich. Now that the rich agreed among themselves, they had disputes over policies, but the purpose of the state was to settle upper class disputes peacefully, control lower class rebellion, and adopt policies that would further the long range stability of this system. What he's describing is exactly what's going on today. You have corporations, billionaire oligarchs who own the government, but also their job is to make the middle class, the poor, and the lower classes all fight each other. They want to prevent a rebellion. That's exactly what he's talking about in here. They don't want the system. They want the system to stay stable for them. But once the system starts becoming stable for everyone, that's when they become concerned. The arrangement between Democrats and Republicans to elect Rutherford B. Hayes in 1877 set the tone. Now, for those who don't know, he technically won on like a really corrupt technicality. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, I definitely would look it up. I don't remember the exact details, but I know it was some corruption that went on to get him in the presidency. Whether Democrats or Republicans won, national policy would not change in an important way. When Grover Cleveland, a Democrat, ran for president in 1884, the only president to serve two non-consecutive terms, by the way, the general impression in the country was that he opposed the power of monopolies and corporations. That would change later in their second presidency. And that the Republican Party, whose candidate was James Blaine, stood for the wealthy. But when Cleveland defeated Blaine, Jay Gould wired him, quote, "I feel that the vast business interest of the country will be entirely safe in your hands," end quote. And he was right. One of Cleveland's chief advisors was William Whitney, a millionaire and corporation lawyer who married into the Standard Oil fortune and was appointed Secretary of the Navy by Cleveland. He immediately set about to create a, quote, steel navy, buying the steel at artificially high prices from Carnegie's plants. Cleveland himself assured industrialists that his election should not frighten them, and yet he ran being against the wealthy. See that? Quote, "No harm shall come to any business interests as the result of administrative policy so long as I am president." End quote. A transfer of executive control from one party to another does not mean any serious disturbance of existing conditions. The presidential election itself had avoided real issues. There was no clear understanding of which interest would gain and which would lose if certain policies were adopted. It took the usual form of election campaigns, concealing the basic similarity of the parties by dwelling on personalities, gossip, and trivialities. Henry Adams, an astute literary commenter on the era, wrote to a friend about the election. "We'll here plunge into politics funnier than words can express. Very great issues are involved, but that amusing thing is that no one talks about interests. By common consent, they agree to let these alone. We are afraid to discuss them. Instead of this, the press is engaged in a most amusing dispute whether Mr. Cleveland had an illegitimate child and did or did not live with more than one mistress." Personal tax. In 1887, with a huge surplus in the Treasury, Cleveland vetoed a bill appropriating $100,000 to give to relief to Texas farmers to help them buy seed grain during a drought. He said, quote, "Federal aid In such cases encourages the expectation of paternal care on the part of the government and weakens the sturdiness of our national character. End quote. But that same year, Cleveland used his gold surplus to pay off wealthy bondholders at $28 above the $100 value of each bond, a gift of $45 million. The chief reform of the Cleveland administration gives away the secret of reform legislation in America. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 was supposed to regulate the railroads on behalf of the consumers. But Richard Olney, a lawyer for the Boston and Maine and other railroads, and soon to be Cleveland's Attorney General, see a pattern? Told railroad officials who complained about the Interstate Commerce Commission that it would not be wise to abolish the commission, quote, from a railroad point of view, end quote. He explained, the commission is or can be made of great use to the railroads. It satisfies the popular clamor for a government supervision of railroads, at the same time that the supervision is almost entirely normal. The part of wisdom is not to destroy the commission, but to utilize it. Cleveland himself, in his 1887 State of the Union message, had made a similar point, adding a warning, quote, opportunity for safe, careful, and deliberate reform is now offered, and none of us should be unmindful of a time when an abused and irritated people may insist upon a radical and sweeping rectification of their wrongs. End quote. Republican Benjamin Harrison, who succeeded Cleveland as president from 1889 to 93, was described by Matthew Josephson, and his colorful study of the post-Civil War years, quote, Benjamin Harrison had the exclusive distinction of having served the railway corporations in the dual capacity of lawyer and soldier. He prosecuted the strikers of 1877 in the federal courts, and he also organized and commanded a company of soldiers during the strike. End quote. Harrison's term also saw a gesture toward reform. The Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890 called itself, quote, an act to protect trade and commerce against unlawful restraints, end quote. And it made it illegal to, quote, combination or conspiracy to restrain trade in the interest of foreign commerce, or interstate or foreign commerce, excuse me. Senator John Sherman, author of the act, explained the need to conciliate. The critics in the monopoly, quote, they had monopolies of old but never before such giants as in our day. You must heed the appeal or be ready for the socialist, the communist, the nihilist society is now disturbed by forces never felt before. End quote. When Cleveland was elected president again in 1892, Andrew Carnegie in Europe received a letter from the manager of his steel plants, Henry Clay Frick, quote, I'm very sorry for President Harrison, but I cannot see that our interests are going to be affected, one way or the other, by the change in administration. End quote. Cleveland, facing the agitation in the country caused by the Panic and Depression of 1893, used troops to, quote, break out, quote, Coxey's Army, a demonstration of unemployed men who had come to Washington, and again to break up the national strike on the railroads the following year. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court, despite its look of somber, black road fairness, was doing it for the bid of the ruling class, the ruling elites. How could it be independent with its members chosen by the president and ratified by the Senate? How could it be neutral between rich and poor, when its members were often formerly wealthy lawyers and always came from the upper class? Early in the 19th century, the court laid the legal basis for a nationally regulated economy by establishing federal control over interstate commerce and the legal basis for corporate capitalism by making the contract sacred. By 1895, the court interpreted the Sherman Act as to make it harmless. It said a monopoly of sugar refining was a monopoly in manufacturing, nor commerce, and so could not be regulated by Congress through the Sherman Act. This is U.S. versus E.C. Knight Co. That's how they coded the law cases and Supreme Court records when you go and you'll see like U.S. versus Dumb Nuts Donut Company or whatever. That's just how they number, and that's how they label it. And then you'll have the number 526 or something. That's just how they label it in the Supreme Court archive. So if people were wondering why it's written that way, that's how it is. The court also said the Sherman Act could be used against interstate strikes, the railway strike of 1894, because they were in restraint of trade. It also declared unconstitutional a small attempt by Congress to tax high incomes at a higher rate. Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company. In later years, it would refuse to break up the Standard Oil and American tobacco monopolies, saying the Sherman Act barred only, quote, unreasonable consolidations and restraint of trade. That's the fancy language they use to defend monopolies and screw over consumers. A New York banker toasted the Supreme Court in 1895, quote, I give you, gentlemen, the Supreme Court of the United States, guardian of the dollar, defender of proper property, enemy of spoliation, sheet anchor of the Republic. Unquote. Very soon after the 14th Amendment became law, the Supreme Court began to demolish it as a protection for blacks and to develop it as a protection for corporations. However, in 1877, a Supreme Court decision, Munn versus Illinois, approved state laws regulating the prices charged to farmers for the use of grain elevators. The grain elevator company argued it was a person being deprived of property, thus violating the 14th Amendment's declaration, quote, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, end quote. The Supreme Court disagreed, saying that grain elevators were not simply private property, but were invested with a, quote, public interest, and so could be regulated. 1 year after that decision, the American Bar Association, organized by lawyers accustomed to serving the wealthy, began a national campaign of education to reserve the court decision. Its president said, at different times, quote, if trust are a defensive weapon of property interest against the communistic trend, they are desired. End quote. And quote, monopoly is often a necessity and an advantage. End quote. By 1886, they succeed. State legislatures, under the pressure of aroused farmers, had passed laws to regulate the rates charged farmers by the railroads. The Supreme Court that year, Wabash versus Illinois, said states could not do this, that this was an intrusion on federal power. That year alone, the court did away with 230 laws that had been passed to regulate corporations. By this time, the Supreme Court had accepted the argument that corporations were, quote, persons, and their money was property protected by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Supposedly, the amendment had been passed to protect Negro rights, but of the 14th Amendment, cases brought before the Supreme Court. Between 1890 and 1910, 19 dealt with the Negro, 288 dealt with corporations. The justices of the Supreme Court were not simply interpreters of the Constitution. They were men of certain backgrounds, of certain interest. One of them, Justice Samuel Miller, had said in 1875, quote, it is vain to contend with judges who have been at the bar that advocates for 40 years of railroad companies and all forms of associated capital, end quote. In 1893, Supreme Court Justice David J. Brewer, addressing the New York State Bar Association, said, quote, it is the unvarying law that the wealth of the community will be in the hands of the few. The great majority of men are unwilling to endure that long self-denial and saving what makes accumulations possible. And hence it always been, and until human nature has been modeled always will be true, that the wealth of a nation is in the hands of a few, while the many subsist upon the proceeds of their daily toil. Alright guys, I'm going to end it here a little early. I just wanted to get back into chapter 11 for you guys. And also it's just a little bit quicker for me to upload it when it's not half an hour long. But I'll definitely make the next one a lot longer. Hope you guys enjoyed, and like I said, you guys are going to start noticing a pattern as we get into the modern present day with a lot of similarities with how the Supreme Court rulings affect society, why they rule a certain way, who picked those judges, what were the judges passed,